Geoffrey. Thanks for being on. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Phil, for having me here.
So I'm Phil from Webisoft. We build custom software, and we started this podcast because our marketing team told us it was a good idea. Geoffrey, do you want to talk about who you are
Sure.
and what your role is to the company and what you're doing? A little bit of an intro.
My name is Geoffrey Thyne. I'm a research scientist, been a research scientist for a long time. Right now, I'm involved in a company called Engineered Salinity, which is ESAL, ESAL for short. They didn't like the name Engineered Salinity, the marketing people, same thing. They wanted a shorter name.
Mm-hmm.
And what we do is we get a lot more oil out of oil fields. So we have a technology that we've built up over the last 10, 12 years. It's patented. It's new in the sense that the industry, we've only had a few people try it in the field. It took a long time to develop it. So now, at this point, everybody who's tried it has gotten exactly the results we predicted that they would. So they're happy. The question that the reason I started this and started the research was, geez, I've been in oil and gas a long time. My first job was 1979, and was that right? God, is it that long? Ooh, that's scary, isn't it? And I worked in enhanced oil recovery, what they call EOR, and it was CO2 at the time. I was working for a major, and we always heard, "Oh, we leave all this oil behind." So globally, average oil recovery is about 30% of what's in place. And they always said, well, if oil is just $10 a barrel more, we're all going to do EOR. Well, oil was $20 a barrel then. And I think we know it's more than 10 now. And we don't do much EOR. I think like maybe 3% of the world's production is from enhanced oil recovery. And it's sort of a crazy idea because you spend all this time and money discovering the field and drilling the field and putting in the pipelines and the infrastructure and then you get 30% and walk away. So that was something that kind of drove us to say, is there a better way to do this? And more importantly, maybe big picture, the maximum number of discoveries in the oil business was in the 60s, the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
Ever since then, the number of discoveries has been declining. And obviously, the technology is better to look for oil. We've looked in more and more places. Now we're off into deep water, for instance. And what that does is, besides make it much harder to find and much harder to produce, it makes it more expensive. So, when do we hit that magic point where we're going to require $100 a barrel to continue to produce oil? And if we do, is that going to be economically viable?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of the driver for our technology and other EOR technologies is to say, can we go back to these old fields where we've left 60, 70% behind and start getting that? Because that's going to be much cheaper than going and constantly trying to find new oil. And then, the question I saw the other day on LinkedIn, ooh, they discovered a bunch of oil in Antarctica, not the Arctic, but Antarctica. Oh, they're going to develop all that. And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? Offshore is a bear. You're going to go down to Antarctica and drill? Okay, I'll wait for that one.
Right.
So that's what we do. And, hopefully we're going to see, I believe personally, we will see a transition in the industry as these new finds get more and more expensive to find and develop. People will start looking back at their old assets and resources. And I mean, if it hadn't been for shale, we'd probably already be there.
Mm.
But shale has kind of, revolutionized the oil industry. Unfortunately, the only place you can do shale is pretty much the U.S. and Argentina because you need certain components. I mean, besides shale, you need the rock. You need a lot of money. I learned at Entercon that we are spending $100 billion a year capex to maintain shale production, not to increase it, just to maintain it. You need a favorable legal setting or regulatory setting, which we have in the US. And you need a big infrastructure in terms of transportation because you've got to drill wells all the time. So you've got to have supply chains that supply the materials, the wells, the people, and go out and be drilling every day, drilling a new well, drilling a new well. And it turns out that's actually really challenging to maintain that pace of operations versus old fields, which you drilled, and some old fields here in Wyoming, we have a field that's 100 years old that's still pumping oil, and no one has to drill a new well or anything like that. So it's a big transition that I think we're seeing in industry looking ahead.
So moving towards more of optimization, basically.
Yes, definitely. And I think that's where information is playing a big role now. We're talking about using AI or
Hmm.
using machine learning, right?
More sensors
And
everywhere.
yes, real time sensing. Um, that's what you've seen. I've seen at least the last 20 years is, that's come on big. And the other question is all you guys, the majors, the bigger companies, have mounds of data
Hmm.
that you collected and you didn't do much with. And
Yeah,
can we go
until
back?
now, I guess, where now you have the capabilities to
Well,
execute. Yeah.
yeah, the capabilities. And then the question is, how proprietary are you going to continue to hold this information?
Mm.
Because are you actually going to get some benefit? In the old days, listen to me, when exploration was king, that information was exceptionally valuable.
Yeah.
And now, it's still true, but to a much lesser extent because exploration is so expensive. And I don't know if most people realize this, but starting about 10 years ago, all the majors started chopping their exploration budgets because they just didn't see the return on investment.
Because all the like obvious areas have been, looked
Yeah,
at
pretty
already.
much.
Yeah. So now
Yeah.
it's, yeah.
We got 6 continents pretty well covered.
Yeah. Yeah. So now it's like you said, Antarctica or, some remote places that would be pretty expensive. And then discovery becomes, it's an ROI problem.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Shell drilled two Arctic Ocean wells. It was about 10 years ago, and they had to write off $7 billion. Yeah, your
They don't like
balance
that.
sheet looks no. I don't think the stockholders were too excited.
No, not exciting. So yeah, they'd be a little more careful, cautious next time. In your current role, which I understand is CTO,
Yeah,
what takes up most of your day?
stupid emails.
Hmm.
I shouldn't
Written by
say
AI?
that. Some of them. You
Dear
after a while you
Geoffrey,
could, yeah, you can tell after a while.
you can.
It's
Double
it
hyphen
scared
is
me.
a dead giveaway.
Oh, I heard somebody on PBS, a language expert, and she said they were talking about education, and they said, students are using AI to
Hmm.
write their papers.
Yeah.
And she goes, fortunately, we recognize that as an educator. She said, what scares me, and she was a language expert, she said, is students are starting to talk like AI.
Oh boy.
They're using that phraseology. And she was actually documenting it. And I was like, you're what? And then I thought, well, yeah, if you spend a lot of time with it and you're reading this stuff all the time, you're going to tend to pick up that formulation of language.
Mm. So,
Scary thought.
like I'd have to. I don't think my kids are too young to use it to that extent, right? No, but
Good.
obviously, so my oldest is 12. I get,
Oh,
they,
well,
well,
that's
this is,
about,
she's close. She's getting there, right?
yeah.
But she doesn't have access to,
Oh,
I'm not letting her,
you
use,
think.
well, allegedly doesn't have access. But I already, I could see the YouTube talk, right?
Yeah.
Where like they watch all their shows and they kind of pick it up. So it makes sense that, if they're spending a lot of time, let's say talking and chatting with AI, they would pick that up, right?
Yeah.
Subconsciously, I guess.
I think it's happening, and it's a little scary at times to
Hmm.
me.
Well, there's a
Um,
transformation of how interaction works, right?
Absolutely, and it's a wonderful tool. I think that's the thing that's come out in the last 5 years to me as a scientist. It's like having a pretty diligent graduate student go out and collect references. The scary part to me was it would make things up.
Yeah.
And it was like, that's not only is it not factual, you've presented it as facts. And I went out and looked for this journal and this author, and it didn't exist. And it was
Yeah.
like,
It's very sure of
wow.
itself, right?
Oh, of
Especially
course.
if you, I'm sure you've tried like GPT-5, for instance, right?
Yeah.
So there's GPT-5 base, which looks like OpenAI was just trying to save compute. It was like, okay, we're gonna give it.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're a Rick and Morty fan, but there's a Rick and Morty episode where they're in a simulation and they have to cut memory because one part is taking too much, and so they're cutting down memory to one simulation, and the guy doesn't even realize it because he's too dumb, right? But that's kind of how it feels sometimes because so GPT-5 will ask something and it'll like you said, matter of fact will reply something like this is what it
Hmm.
is, and you
Very
say no, you're
authoritative.
wrong, and then it switches model to thinking, and
Right.
we'll say okay, I'm thinking for a while. Yeah, you're right. Oh, you caught
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. Oops. And I heard one of the AI CEOs the other day
Mhm.
said that one of the researchers that works for him was working with one of the AIs, and I don't remember which one, and said, "Well, heck, maybe we'll just turn you off and restart you." And the AI threatened him with
Oh yeah,
blackmail.
I saw that.
He was going to create the AI was going to create emails that implied this guy was having an affair.
Blackmail. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't
And I
remember
was
which one
like,
it was, but I read that. Yeah.
yeah. And it's like, whoa, these AIs have grown personalities, and who are they learning from? Humans.
Hmm.
That's
Which is a bad
probably.
idea.
I'm not thinking we're the best example.
Yeah, some of us aren't for sure. It's getting interesting.
That's
Um,
that's a good way to put it. But it is a tool, and I think particularly when you're working, like in my business, oil and gas,
yeah.
you have an enormous amount of information, and more than anybody can really absorb and process. And so having some pre-processing, I think, is a very valuable tool. But you got to ride herd.
Hmm.
And so we went, as you mentioned, five basic, and then we went to pro, hoping for. And my partner came to me where she was preparing a presentation, and she said, "Hey, here's what AI gave me." And I looked at it and I said, "Did did I tell you this stuff? I mean, I know you're using AI, but you're using AI for illustrations and graphics. Did I give you this text?" And she goes, "No." And I said, "Oh, thank God, because I thought I had said something really stupid." Um, and so I think that you know where will it go in the future? I asked my daughter-in-law, who's big on it. I said, "So does it save? You take your time to train it, right, for something. Can you save that? So the next time you start, the AI will be that smart, you know?" And she goes, "Well, yeah, kind of, but you can't share it." And I said, "Oh, so you believe that they're not that the AI firms aren't taking all these trained AI sessions and using it to improve their product?" I said, "I'm a little skeptical about that."
No, I mean that's even a fact, right? That's what they're doing. But
Yeah, of course.
on the enterprise side, for instance, there's ways to prevent that. And you'd
Yes.
have like a closed, call it like small language model, right? Which is
Right.
essentially you take, some like a base model and then you train it on specifically their data set.
Right.
And then it's probably hosted on premise or something like that so that it doesn't, again, that data
In
stays
in, in
proprietary
theory,
in
in
theory.
theory, and she said that she's working for a big conglomerate, and she said, "Oh, no, 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 we have all that sealed up." And I just thought, yeah, you know,
That's a pretty
I
big
don't believe it.
lawsuit if it wasn't sealed up, though, right? Especially those companies that are selling to
Well,
enterprise.
I don't know, Phil. I think we've learned that lawsuits, particularly in the last 8 years, or particularly the last year and a half, in theory, lawsuits should prevent people
Mm.
from doing things that are immoral or illegal. And yeah,
At the end of the day, it's a financial decision. Maybe
yeah,
there's
it
more money to
is.
be made from getting that data.
No, you're exactly
Yeah.
right. I mean, it's like Facebook. They're not supposed to share your pictures, sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then
It's
you see your picture one day.
ask
Oh,
for forgiveness, not permission type thing.
I think
Um,
it really is.
yeah.
And so I think the oil companies are probably just, every bit of business we do, there's an NDA.
Hmm.
And we don't really care about NDAs, to be honest, because our stuff's so cutting edge that it's like, yeah, somebody catch
Try
up,
to copy
please.
us. Some.
Yeah,
Yeah.
please.
Go
That'll be
ahead.
fun.
Yeah.
You want to run those 5,000 experiments? Probably not. It's just standard in the business.
Mhm.
Everything's covered by an NDA. We had one where we couldn't even tell people where their parking lot was. Yes,
Okay.
the company we were working for, we could not tell anybody where their parking lot was. And I'm thinking, you're in Midland. Everybody knows where your freaking parking lot is. It was a pretty big company. But it's just standard. So I
Yeah.
think that when you get to AI, there's going to be reluctance, kind of an institutional reluctance to really release all that information and
Hmm.
train an AI. And so, what's the answer? I guess going ahead, the answer may be if I was a CEO instead of a CTO,
Yeah.
I
You're
would
one
be
letter
saying,
away, really.
well, come on, I'm in the suite.
Yeah.
Here it is. You see the beautiful suite.
Hmm.
Um, no, it's down the hall. Um, the What I would do is say we want to create what you said, small language models
Yeah.
that we can sell to you, ExxonMobil, and you're going to
Hmm.
have your own. And it's all going to be in house, and you're going to have, a way to protect your information and the answers that this. I have always questioned where is the boundary between machine learning and AI.
Hmm.
And if you talk to an expert, they have a very clear delineation.
They do?
But I think for
Okay. Because for
yeah,
me, it seemed like AI was really a general term that, I don't really see a standard definition anywhere.
yeah, that was it. There's a professor here. I'm in Laramie, Wyoming, so the University of Wyoming is here, and I was talking to a professor who specializes in this sort of thing, and he said, the big deal, we don't know. He goes,
Hmm.
honestly, he said, we don't know where the boundary really is.
Yeah.
We have academic definitions of those boundaries, but he said, like, for instance, I was giving him a big data set to look at, and he goes, no, don't just send me the numbers. And I said, what? What do you mean? And he goes, AI, in the large language model sense, learns better from graphics,
Okay.
not tables of numbers, and like you would normally think of putting in machine learning, you put in tables of numbers and it goes
Hmm.
through. And I was like, why does it learn from graphics better? He goes, we have no idea. He goes, but it does. And I thought, well, okay, it's emulating. The big breakthrough in AI was emulating the structure of the brain,
Hmm.
basically, the neural networks, so to speak. And that was the real breakthrough where it started taking off. And so, okay, people process visual data really well. And so maybe that has something to do with it, the actual structure, if you will, the internal structures or something. But no, he admitted, he said, we don't know. It just,
Well, it's a bit of a black box at this point, right? That's what he means.
yeah,
It got so advanced that now you're not really sure how the results come.
no. And when it hallucinates or tries to blackmail somebody, you kind of go, whoa.
Yeah. Let's revert to
That's,
the past version and see if, hopefully it doesn't
yeah,
happen again.
yeah. So, no, so I think that'll be interesting. But for us, we're sticking to machine learning. I may try go back to Chatty G and version 5 and Pro and say, okay, now that I got the answer, let's
Yeah.
see if you can get the answer, and how do I have to steer you to get the answer?
You probably have to, and again, this is specific to that, but just to keep it on thinking mode or pro mode or something.
Yes, you do have to keep it on thinking mode, and
Yeah.
and it's
It's going to be slower to respond, but it's going to be at least the
but
right
but
response.
but people
Probably.
like your daughter won't even think about it.
That's the
They'll
thing.
grow up with
I
it,
mean,
and
yeah.
they'll find uses for it that you and I can't imagine.
And there are people that see Facebook news and just assume it's true right away, right? So it's the same kind of people that would, look at a ChatGPT response and think this is the absolute truth.
Well, come on. There's people that believe CNN
There we go.
or CBS or NBC or any of them.
So I guess critical thinking is what's missing.
Yeah, it's always been missing, hasn't it?
I don't think it's going to get better.
I don't think so. If you can go on a computer screen and get an answer you feel is authoritative,
Yeah.
there's a lot
Yeah.
of that I think, people talk about it today, right? They say, oh, well, AI is going to take over and Skynet and the whole bit.
Mm-hmm.
I would say two things. I'd say one, that was fiction, Skynet. A little scary watching what's happening in Ukraine with drones and how soon will they be autonomous. But more importantly, it's learning from us. It's not learning anything new. It's just learning how humans' brains, if you will, work, or human combination of brains and emotion. And I think there's always been this group of people, large part of the population, that doesn't engage in critical thinking. It doesn't bring any value to their lives. And so I don't see that's any different than it's always been. There's a new book coming out. I can't remember the two authors. It just came out called Charlatans.
Okay.
And so it's about, they're studying various instances of well-documented of big scams, if you will. And they said, it's just amazing. And the guy was on PBS talking about it. And he said, it's just amazing that people fall for this. Lots of people, like millions of people. And he was talking about a religious figure in Brazil. And he has more churches. He has churches in more countries than McDonald's.
Wow.
And he targets the poorest people. And he tells them that God wants you to give something to me, and it has to be big. It has to be a huge sacrifice, or it doesn't count. And
otherwise, it's not meaningful.
You pissed the Holy Ghost off. And he goes, it's just amazing. This guy's a billionaire now, lives in these mansions, and he's been successful at targeting these people. And he said, it just seems to be human nature that people want to hear an answer.
Yeah.
Feel, I don't know, that they know something, that they're confident. And it kind of, I couldn't help but think of back to the Aztecs and why did they think sacrificing somebody up on top of a pyramid and ripping their heart out was going to make the weather change? But they did.
Yeah. And the weather did change. So they were right.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like global warming. When we predict it's going to get warmer, and it's like, well, it's supposed to get warmer. That's why there used to be 2 miles of ice.
I think they rebranded it recently to climate change to accommodate that it does get colder sometimes.
Well, I think
it goes both ways. Yeah.
it
Especially
goes both
here
ways.
in Canada, it does get cold.
And we can't be wrong because it got warmer or it got colder. It doesn't really matter. Yeah, I mean, if it's going to actually get warmer, the Canadians are in an excellent position.
Well, we that's why we lobby for anti-science groups, stuff like that, because it benefits our own agenda. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, people think Canada is huge, and it is.
It is
geographically, but everybody lives pretty close to the border because it's cold.
It's too cold out. Yeah. I had a theory for a while that Russia was pushing, like misinformation about climate change because they would benefit from climate change. I'm not sure
Siberia, Siberia would be nice. I have a colleague in Edmonton, and he says, he goes, we have tunnels. I said, what do you mean you have tunnels?
He said that unironically. Okay.
Well, no, he meant on the campus because he said, you should come visit.
That way you don't go outside. Yeah. Makes sense.
Right. And I said, well, I can't come in the winter. Come on. He goes, no, we got tunnels between all the buildings. You don't have to go outside.
Funny enough, Montreal is something like that, where the whole downtown is connected.
Yes. And right across the lake is the same way in Minneapolis, I think it is.
There we go. So
all these
cold
skywalks.
Places, they all think the same way.
Yeah, there you go.
So in your industry, Where do you see the most waste?
Well, I think one area that you can say there's a lot of waste is flaring. The big production uptick in the last 10 years has been out of shale. Shale produces a lot of light liquids, or liquid oils, on the lighter end, generally speaking. Some down to the 30 API or mid range, but they get a lot of gas. And you have to put an infrastructure in place to split the oil and gas apart, and then you can't put them in the same pipeline. In other words, you
Hmm.
got to have a separate pipeline, and so they flare. And I actually saw pictures from the space station going over the U.S. and that part of North Dakota is lit up
Wow. Okay.
from flaring. Yeah, I mean, wow, you could see that from the International Space Station. I think that's one place there's a big waste, that's preferable to releasing just methane. Instead, you're releasing CO2. It's not as
That
potent a
was bad.
greenhouse
Yeah.
gas. Yeah, natural gas is a resource, and so I think that's a big place
Could
that
be reused, you'd think.
yeah, I mean, if you can collect it,
Yeah.
and that's tough because natural gas in the U.S. is cheap.
Hmm.
I mean, you pay $12 an MCF in the or even higher, 16, say in Japan or the UK, and here it's maybe 3. Has a lot of potential to make money. I know that there was a company, Williams, that was working in Western Colorado, and not to get too technical, but they would vent. The standard industry practice out there was to vent this gas without flaring, even. Okay, they had a waiver from the regulatory commission, and they welded on a $200 piece of pipe to take this vented gas and stick it back in the pipeline, and then send it to a separator where they had it hooked up to a
Mm.
pipeline. And they made like $20 million the first year. And yeah, so I think there are solutions to that, but I think industry it's a very reactionary industry. It's a very conservative,
Yeah.
extremely conservative. Their attitude is, we're making a lot of money, so don't
If
mess
it's
with
not
us.
broken, don't fix it, is what I
Fix
hear
it.
a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's an example. There are other examples, other places where I won't name any companies, but we just ran some samples for somebody, and we needed the surfactant they were using in the field, and they're in Texas, South Texas. I said, hey, they called me up and they said, hey, can you start tomorrow? Can you start tomorrow? We're in a hurry. And I said, no, the surfactant isn't here. Did you guys mail it, right? Did you send it by FedEx? Right? What'd you do? Oh, yeah, yeah. We sent it. Here's the receipt and everything. Called up the next day. Is it there? And I said, no, it's not there. This was a Friday. And I said, so guys, I can't start till Monday. And I'm hoping that the FedEx guy shows up Monday. And the guy goes, no, no, not a problem. I'm going to hot shot it. And I was like, hot shot? What are you talking about? And he had a guy drive it from Texas to Wyoming, a little bottle of the surfactant, so I could start on Sunday in
That's
the
how
lab, have
badly
the
they
lab
needed
guys
you to
get
start.
started.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I thought to I met the guy here at the lab because the guys aren't in working on a Sunday, right? And sure enough, man, there was this guy sitting there in a pickup truck out in the parking lot, and he came up to me and goes, "Are you the guy with?" I have this pack. He had this little tiny box. I'm delivering this, and I said, "You drove this from Midland to Laramie, Wyoming
How long of a drive is
yesterday.
that, by the way, for somebody like me who's in
13
Canada?
hours.
13 hours.
13
Wow.
hours." And he goes, "And it's really nice here. I think I'm going to take a few hours before I drive back." But they paid him by the hour to drive a sample. So that's a place that you could point at,
Yeah.
where's the waste coming from. The other waste I think that is most prevalent is
Okay.
intellectual waste. Um,
In what sense?
we gather enormous amounts of information.
Mm.
And when I worked for a major, it's all proprietary, and I understand all that. But we gather all this information, and we don't really us geeks don't really get to share much with other geeks.
Mm.
And I think companies, I worked at an R&D lab, and they would only hire from Caltech and MIT, which was not me. I was just a worker bee. And these guys spend a lot of effort, but they can't interact with their colleagues from other companies.
Mm.
They can't bring that knowledge together. And that is a critical aspect of science, is the ability to, argue, if you will, or geek out, as my wife would say.
Yeah.
You guys all geek out. And I think that's a place where there's a lot of waste in the sense of, hey guys, we could figure out a lot more stuff. And I
If we
can
put our heads
see,
together. But is there a?
yeah,
I guess they don't want to give any sort of competitive edge.
well, that's the excuse.
Mm.
Um, we used to laugh because we figured out at the R&D lab, which was for ARCO, which is the silent part of BP now. We used to laugh because they would enforce that. You'd come back from a meeting, a technical meeting, and they'd say, "Oh, no, no, no. Okay, first we have to debrief you, and then we have to hear what you figured out that somebody else was doing that we're not
Mm.
doing." And so you'd go through, like, spend 2 or 3 days doing all this. And it was so funny because we kind of stepped back, some of us, and went, well, our drilling success rate is the same across the industry. So clearly there's no secrets.
No,
That is,
something
there's
got
not
out.
some,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, there, or, the basics are the basics. And we would probably do better sharing that to a certain extent, sharing more information, more thoughts, more insights. That's just not the way the industry works. So I
Would
think that's a place where there's waste.
would there be an angle on anonymously sharing data, for instance? Or like,
I've seen
is
that
that the
tried.
problem? Is
Yeah.
like those guys, this is from this company, and then
I think the place that has been tried is what they call consortiums. So they get
right.
an academic institution to set up a consortium of 10 or 12 companies, and
Mm.
they're going to work on a problem that everybody agrees is important.
Mm.
Um, and of course, the university shares everything that their students who are being paid by the oil companies do. Where it would break down, and I ran one, so I have some insight. Where it broke down, we would have a meeting every 6 months, and everybody would come, the representatives from the companies and everything. And it was a one-way flow of information. It was from the university to the companies, but you got very little back unless it was over several beers. You drank enough beer
Yeah.
in the evening, somebody would slip up and always say something,
Mm.
but yeah, I think that's it's just institutional, this secrecy. And I don't know, who knows, if we didn't have that, would we all be better off as an industry? We'd be more efficient. I think
Tough to say.
so. I'll take it a step further and say our research 20 years ago, BP up on the North Slope announced this idea. They said, we tried it and we changed the salinity of the water that we were injecting into the reservoir. We got a lot more oil. Now, the truth is, it was all a mistake. I talked to somebody who was actually there. They screwed up, but it worked. So it was a happy accident.
Mm.
And 2 years later, Shell came out and said, yeah, we did the same thing, River Jordan water, and it worked great in I think it was Syria that they had a field in. Yet, here we are, 20 years later. And who figured all this out are some guys in Wyoming.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, are you kidding me? I mean, we're not super intelligent or brilliant or anything, but we assembled all that information and then did what all these companies, I mean, I'm talking to Ramco, ExxonMobil, BP, Eni, Total, go on and on, huge international companies have all been chasing this. And all we did was take all of that information that they did make public and then said, well, we just need to do a series of experiments that are very carefully controlled to try and pull all the variables apart and figure out which one does what. And so here we are. Our technology, if implemented worldwide, would produce another 300 billion barrels of oil from old fields. We've produced about a trillion in the last 150 years, by the way. And so that's a trillion barrels. That's with a big T. Just doing what we figured out to do would get another 300 billion barrels.
Mm.
And so
yeah.
that's kind of wasteful that we had to figure it out. To me, it seems like they could have put their heads together and figured this out instead of
So
some
was
guys
it
in
a
Wyoming.
priority? So what was the blocker there to figure it out?
Again, the institutionalizing, the siloing
The
of
culture,
information
essentially.
and knowledge, the culture. Yeah.
Yeah.
Every one of these big companies had a group that was working on it, and they worked on it for 2 or 3 years, and then they'd get transferred someplace else, or something else would be more important to see. By the way, the BP experience, the CEO of BP came out 20 years ago and said, we figured this out. We got it to work on the North Slope. We're going to reclassify worldwide reserves, going to up them by 10%. He lost his job 6 months later. And I think, that's probably why BP steers away from it
Mm.
nowadays. But I mean, 300 billion barrels is a pretty big
Not
prize.
insignificant.
Yeah. So why not share that information? Why did it take a bunch of geeks in Wyoming digging through the garbage pile to find it? Come on.
Well, hopefully they listen to the podcast.
Yeah, the podcast, it's been amazing, the last 5 years publicizing it,
Yeah.
and to be honest, we were still in the research arc, so
Yeah.
we were just releasing
But
our
now you're
stuff. And
at market.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're at market. Everybody who's tried it has seen exactly what you know the last guy got 20% more oil and half as much water. And I'm not even talking about the savings he's making by using salty water instead of fresh water.
Yeah.
Um,
And
so
like,
yeah,
correct me if I'm wrong, but like chemicals also sometimes are used. Like,
nope,
no,
not in our
not
our
in your,
process.
but I mean in
Yeah,
general for that process,
yes, chemicals are used, and that's the interesting part, because they're expensive.
and
Um,
probably not great for the environment,
Probably
allegedly.
not,
Yeah.
allegedly, and there are a few instances documented where there's been problems in the environment because of
Mm-hmm.
chemicals people are sticking in the ground. But I'm all in favor of anything that works.
Right.
I'm the enigma or the contradiction. I think solar and wind are great. I think renewables are great. I live in a passive solar house with panels and batteries and the whole bit.
Tesla?
Um, no,
No.
no, Franklin whole house. Thank you.
Okay.
Put a plug in there.
Yeah. Might
Um,
as well.
but and I live in a cold climate like you guys do, 7,500 feet elevation,
Mm-hmm.
42 degrees north latitude. Come on, man, it's cold in the winter,
Mm-hmm.
and even it snows in June here. So
In June, in certain
yes,
parts where it's
oh yeah, yeah.
a little
But
higher. Yeah.
I see the end at some point of the petroleum era, not for petrochemicals, but
Not as
for
soon as maybe some people have thought, though, right? Like it seems to be
no.
sticking
I
around.
think yeah, we will stick around. I mean, fossil fuels provide 80% of the energy for the world, and that leaves currently about 5 billion people in energy poverty. And we can't scale it up. That's the thing people don't understand about fossil fuels. We've had 150 years more, if you count coal, to build the infrastructure, to build the technology, to refine the technology. I don't know what Henry Ford would think today if he saw a modern internal combustion engine car, a new Audi or something. He'd just be like, "Oh my God, I can't believe that's what I started 100 years
Look
ago."
at that scratchy finish. This is embarrassing.
Yeah, but I think we'll be with fossil fuels for at least another generation or two.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
absolutely believe the transition is coming. I'm all in favor of it. What would cut that transition or what would shorten that transition is the price of energy going up a lot.
Yeah.
And when you've got 4 billion people who live, or 5 billion people who live in energy poverty, when you have people in Africa dying of lung diseases because they have to cook in a hut over an open flame from dung, burning dung,
Yeah.
which is very common, and they cook over that, and you know, it's just ridiculous. We need to fix that. And if it's solar, if it's wind, if it's propane,
Hmm.
whatever it is, we need to do that. So you got to look at, we need 5 times as much energy as we have right now today to raise that standard of living up to what you and I enjoy. And to me, that's a much bigger deal than worrying about, oh, we want to cut down or we want to have solar go faster or this
Yeah.
or that or the other. Guys, it's a generational, maybe multi-generational aspiration to get to this point where we don't have to use that stuff anymore. But for right now, oh yeah, we're going to be pumping oil and gas and
Yeah.
digging coal for a while.
Let's start by fixing the foundation before optimizing, basically.
I visit, geologists get sent to the garden spots of the world, I'll tell you.
Hmm.
And you get to see what the rest of the world lives like.
Yeah.
And it's stunning. It's stunning. You can't believe that people have to live like that. They don't have a choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So I tell my
it's
kids when they complain that they didn't get the new Nike shoes that year. Um,
it doesn't do any good.
no.
Did it work for you when you were that age?
uh, I don't remember.
I do, boy. My
Pro-
mom was like, "Clean that plate. There's somebody starving in Africa right
yeah.
now,"
Yeah.
and there
Yeah.
was, and there still is. So I kind of think that's the energy business is, to me, gotten a bad rap the last 20 years with
Yeah.
climate change and
It's
CO2.
yeah.
And the reason for that is multiple. I mean, there are some bad things about the energy industry. Don't get me wrong, there are environmental damage and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But people never balance that against what did you get
Yeah.
for paying this price. And I read the other day the average electric bill in the first world is about 2% of take home income. 2%. And that's, what a deal. Are you kidding? For all the electronic devices and everything we
Yeah.
run and do, and my home is totally electric, so I get a real feel for that.
Yeah.
And
Well, we
it's
take
like,
that for
oh my
granted, don't
gosh.
we? Yeah.
Oh, don't we? Yeah, we do. And that's human nature, and I'm not embarrassed by it, but I'm just
Yeah.
kind of like, hey guys, if you're going to talk about the downside of any form of energy, solar panels, windmills, whatever, nuclear
Talk about the
plants,
upsides, essentially.
yeah, talk about what you get for it. Because the reason we're not all, I always find it amusing. What is it? Just Stop Oil, the UK activist group, I think.
Maybe. Yeah. I've lost track of all the activism in the UK.
Yeah, there's a bunch. These guys were at a protest. They showed a picture, and they were all wearing jackets. It's rainy over there.
Yeah. Of
Rain
course.
jackets made with petrochemicals.
Yeah.
And it's just like, just stop oil. And I thought, well, why don't you guys show us the way? Just stop for a week. Don't use any fossil fuel products for 1 week.
Yeah.
Tell me what that, oh, you mean you're Amish. And even the Amish don't do that. But I'm saying,
Almost
you have to
impossible.
take
Yeah.
you'd have to take a huge step back. And most people aren't going to do that, and they don't want to do that.
No, they don't want to sacrifice their own comfort. They don't,
No.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm all, like I say, I'm all about renewables and the transition, but at the same time, you got to look at the pluses and minuses.
Hmm.
More people die from cold than die from heat, like 10 times as many or something. And so people like us who live in a cold place really understand that when your car goes in the ditch one night, they may not find you till next spring.
Mm.
and that actually does happen.
So I have a big car, so it's easy to find.
Yeah, exactly. Send up your flares.
Yeah. 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 I know we're coming up on time, so I want to be mindful of
Okay,
that. But I do have one last question. I have
sure.
two, but I'll really combine them. What innovation are you most excited about for the next, couple years? And then
Hmm.
what keeps you up at night?
Well, I'm shameless, so I'll say our tech
Hmm.
is an innovation I want to see brought to market and utilized because I think it'll fundamentally change the industry in many positive ways. What keeps me up at night is trying to figure out how to get people to understand this is not some science project. This is something you can put in your property tomorrow and see those benefits. You started out this podcast and you said, "Hey, the marketing guys told us that we needed to be on social media and have a face." And I think it's the same thing for any of us entrepreneurs who are out there trying to introduce a new product. We're all trying to figure out how do we get people's attention
Hmm.
and get them to try. And I read the other day, Steve Jobs, Apple,
Steve
um,
Jobs?
Jobs. Yeah, sorry, Jobs. Yeah, is that a Canadian thing?
Maybe.
Jobs, eh?
Maybe.
Um, but he said you got to get people to try it, and then you got to get them to tell their friends they liked it,
Yeah.
and then people adopt it, and you build a brand, and you build brand loyalty,
Yeah.
and I think it's
It seems from my experience doing this podcast, and I've done, 10 of these, the recurring theme here for oil and gas is that they all want to see it work once.
yes, they just don't want to be the first.
Exactly. Yeah.
Everybody wants to be second.
Yeah.
And that's been a big breakthrough for us in the last year. Is it takes a while to see results for
Building
us.
case studies and essentially,
Yep,
getting the
and
word
and
out. Yeah.
and being able to say, "Oh, I can't." I actually, you'll laugh at this, and I'll close with this. So the last job we did, they saw my talk at ERTEC, which is a big shale meeting
Yeah.
every year, and so the guy came up to me and he said, "Oh, I think you're right. I think we see this in our field. I want to do this." And oh, great, And he calls me up a week later. And he goes, "So, do you have any references?" And I was like, "Sure, I got like 10 papers, man. What do you want?" He goes, "No, no. I mean, can I talk to somebody, another human that did this?" And I was like, "Oh shit. Pardon. Sorry, folks. It's podcast." Um, I thought,
It's
well,
R
no.
rated. Don't worry.
Okay, it's R-rated. So I thought, well, who am I going to get to talk who's worked with us that it worked? And I finally thought of a geologist friend of mine who did it and it worked. And his company closed down. So I called him up and I said, "Hey, Nate, would you be willing to talk to this guy?" And he goes, "Oh, yeah, what the hell? I'm not working for those guys anymore. That company's gone. And so he did, and he got a personal reference and then tried it, and it worked. You got to get word of mouth. You got to get people out there. You got to get new ideas out, and you can't be first.
No.
You got to, everybody's
It's a bit of
looking
fake
over
it
the
till you
fence.
make it a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's some of that, and then just you got to produce.
Give it
You
away
got
for
to.
free, I guess, for the first 10. That way you
I,
have 10 that can
I Phil, we tried that.
you try.
I am not kidding. We tried that, and no,
No,
that didn't work.
didn't
Give it
take.
away for free.
Yeah.
We'll do it for free. And they were like, "No, can't be worth anything." And so it's
Wow.
like, "Oh, so now I got to put my price up."
Yeah, or you got to pay them, maybe that's the next step, but
Oh God, no, not anymore. Now we're
now you
over
got the
that
word
hump.
out. Now you got that
Well,
one
I'm
reference.
I'm here with you.
Yeah.
I got another talk later this month to the state people.
Awesome.
I got a talk coming up in February or April to a big industry group. Word gets out, but again, no one wants to be first. You're
Mm.
absolutely right. That's what you're going to hear over and over in the
Yep.
industry. They love new tech, except
They love
they
the
don't want to
idea
try
of
it.
it.
Yes, exactly right. They love the idea.
Yeah.
Um, So yeah, so this podcast and you're putting your guys' self out there. You guys
Yep.
do stuff for offshore, right?
Yep. Yep.
Um, and
Basically anything custom software, AI related. Uh,
yeah, and you know how tough that is
well,
to get
so
people over that hump.
Well, now I'm kind of learning about it, like we've been pretty lucky with our client that I won't necessarily name drop here, but they've been really open. And, I think
Hmm.
we're obviously past the trust phase. Like they, have
Right.
been basically embedded as a tech arm for them for the past couple of years. So they trust us and they're willing to basically engage us for any kind of pilot project or new ventures.
Well,
But
that's
obviously,
excellent.
yeah, so it's good. But I'm wondering like how scalable that is, like in the industry, especially now learning about, But again, it's more about. I think it's about proving, like having a good track record, and then yeah.
Exactly. You have to have a good track record, and you have to be patient because the one thing that people don't understand, I think, about our industry, if you're an outsider, the basic commodity price can go up to 100 and down to
Hmm.
zero
Yeah.
in a month,
Hmm.
and you have no control.
Yeah.
We
That's
watch a
why
lot of business.
when they need something, they need it the next day because you got to jump on that opportunity when it presents itself.
Exactly. And so being agile and flexible, um, and patient and building trust, all those are key issues that, unfortunately, business doesn't always reward that approach.
Right.
You got to have that patience and say, okay, well, we'll be there for you,
Yeah.
you know, and
It's a
and
lot of nurturing.
congratulations. Yeah, congratulations that you guys have gotten this far because offshore is a tough market.
Appreciate it. And Geoffrey, thanks so much for jumping on. This was great.
All right, Phil, thank you again.